Good evening, everyone. My name is Jemima Diodu, and I am the DMU Communications and Engagement Assistant for the Department of Politics and People in Place this academic year. I'm delighted to be introducing and co hosting the DMU 2021 Congress to Campus online event live at the Hugh Aston building, which is open to the public, DMU staff, and students. Before I introduce our esteemed guests, I'd like to say a sincere thank you to everyone that has made this evening possible. These are the US Association of Members of Congress and the Eccles Center for American Studies at the British Library, which organizes and oversees this weekend's events. They will be participating in a series of events that will be online and in person in London and around the country. We would also like to thank the American Embassy and the British Association for American Studies, and to my own institution, De Montfort University, for hosting two flagship events as it does every year for the Department of Politics and International Relations. This year, we would also like to say a very big thank you to Cam Dea and her team who have made this event possible with their excellent support and professionalism. My co host for this evening is DMU's very own Professor of American Studies, Philip Davis, who was also a former director of the Eccles Center for American Studies at the British Library and has been involved with Congress to Campus ever since it started in the UK. The format for this evening will consist of an introduction and some opening remarks from our esteemed guest, who will go on to offer some reflections on things going on in the US and challenges facing the Biden administration. We will then open up the session to questions that have been given in advance and some questions that will come in during the session. We will promptly finish at 8 p.m. Professor Davis will field the audience's questions and put them to our visitors. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we're pleased to welcome everyone. May I please introduce the Honorable Larry LaRocco, former member of Congress for the Department for the Democratic Party in Idaho, and the Right Honorable Tim Hutchinson, who was the former senator for the Republican Party for the state of Arkansas. Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll go first
Yes.
since you introduced me, Jemima. Thank you so much for this opportunity to meet with the people of Leicester and the constituency of DMU. I just want to mention that I was here many years ago for the first Congress to Campus program on the campus here at DMU and with Phil Davies. I'll make just a couple of minute comments on the Biden administration. I'm a strong Biden supporter. I actually went to Iowa and campaigned in the snow for him during the primary season, and I was, of course, delighted to see his victory. He did win, by the way. I want to make that clear. And in spite of what we hear by some, the former president to name one, he did win, and he's off and running, setting up his administration. It's come together very quickly. I wish he had more cooperation from the U.S. Senate in terms of confirming some of his diplomats, but there's a hold on some of the key people to send abroad. Obviously, inflation is on everybody's mind around the world, and particularly in the United States. I think that's causing a slip in his popularity with the polls. But he just had a major victory by passing the infrastructure bill. I think he's going to have another victory here with Build Back Better, which will put us on the course for our participation in climate change and cleaning up our planet. I think he had a bad start in foreign affairs. I think we have to recognize it with Afghanistan. But as commander in chief and president, he took responsibility for some of the problems there on the field. But keep in mind that it was the biggest airlift in the world's history for removing people and our friends and allies from Afghanistan. There's more to do there with our counterterrorism forces. So I think he's tackling things rather well. He's engaged around the world. He has a huge portfolio and understanding of foreign affairs and personal relationships that he is I think using very wisely as he did with China here recently. I'll conclude my remarks with that, and so that we can get on to the important questions.
Larry, thank you. And let me say that the congressman and I are very good friends, and we get along great. But I'm here tonight representing the Republican viewpoint, so I'm going to give a little different perspective. I think President Biden has had a very difficult first year, and it has shown in his very, very low approval ratings in the United States. Some polls have him in the 30s, and one of the lowest rankings that any president has had at this stage in their administration. President Biden, as Larry alluded to, had a very difficult time because of the messy, chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the hard feelings, the feelings of betrayal by many who stood with the U.S. there in Afghanistan. It was just a terrible spectacle for the world to see, and a very rough beginning for President Biden. And then we have the supply chain problems where Americans are going in the grocery store, they're going in the retail stores and finding the shelves are empty, that many of their orders are not being delivered on time, if at all. And that, combined with the 30-year high in inflation, has really, they say to the American people, the economy is doing well. Well, the stock market's doing well, but their pocketbooks are really feeling the pinch. And so the Build Back Better plan that the president's proposed is a dramatic and far-reaching attempt to remake the American economy, touching every aspect of Americans' lives. And I don't believe that, I don't know whether it's going to pass or not. It's going to be a very close vote in the next few weeks, if it gets done this year at all. Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema are decisive in the Senate on how that's going to turn out. Democratic senators who are very skittish about voting for this, but I think the American people are not going to receive it well, and it's not going to be the kind of salvation that Biden's hoping for before the midterm elections, which look very, very good for the Republicans. And I'll stop there, and I'll look forward to the questions.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with these gentlemen, with Jemima, and back at Jamal Foote University. Great place, by the way. Just put in a quick plug. I'm going to ask one question. Then I'm actually going to go out and shot. I can't access the questions from where I am. But that will be no great visual deprivation for you. But in terms of Biden's low approval rates at the moment, are the American public so fickle that they can expect a president in 9 months to produce major changes? Are they so? They seem to have got, some of them seem to have got worried that he isn't doing enough, some that he's threatening to do too much. Given that he was elected, and he was elected by 7 million votes, regardless of some perceptions of that, isn't that a very fickle public to expect them to deliver in a federal checked and balanced system in 9 months?
Well, go ahead, Larry.
Well, let me say, I mean, President Biden just had a huge victory. He had a bipartisan infrastructure bill that's going to deliver for the American people. And Donald Trump tried for 4 years to try and piece something together and even to amend Obamacare, and never got the job done. So we've just had a huge bipartisan victory for something that's really going to deliver for the American people. So I think they're a little impatient. I wouldn't quibble with your word fickle, Phil, but impatient would be the way I would characterize it. But there were 19 senators who voted for the bill, 13 members of the House. It was truly bipartisan. And now we're going to tackle climate change and deliver and re-engage in the Paris Accords and what just happened in Glasgow. And I think he's delivered for the American people. I think there's quite a bit of momentum. I think that the drop in the polls is going to be a bit of a blip, and he'll be back on track. The thing is that he's really working hard with the Congress. He's a creature of the Congress, and he understands the Congress as a longtime senator. So the fact that he's engaged there, and at the same time engaged around the world with leaders that he's had a personal relationship, and we're no longer dealing with this binary relationship between the president and the leaders. He's actually using the proper, I think, diplomatic channels through our apparatus in the State Department and his knowledge. So I'll leave it at that. And,
Well, I will quote the Democratic Congresswoman from Virginia who said, people voted for Joe Biden because he wasn't Donald Trump. They did not vote for him to be the next Franklin Delano Roosevelt and transform America. He didn't have a mandate. It was a close election, and his majorities in the House and Senate are razor thin, and yet he's trying to do this very dramatic remaking of the American economy. So I just disagree. People are not approving of his administration because food prices are up 25%. Pork, chicken, the necessities of life. They go to the gasoline pump and they're paying $1 more than they did a year ago. They're feeling it. And it's easy to say, well, they're not being patient. They're hurting. So the president gets the blame or the credit. Right now, it's the blame.
Well, there's a supply chain issue, but Americans are consuming quite a bit. The retail sales figures that came out today were pretty dramatic. So people are voting with their pocketbook and moving the economy along. But inflation, I will grant, is a looming issue for the president, and he's got to deal with it. There's no question about that. And the buck stops there. And what I like about President Biden is that the lies have stopped. He's dealing with the issues. He takes responsibility for policy, and he's trying to move the country forward. And the Congresswoman that you were referring to, Congresswoman Spanberger, she's a moderate, and he's able to bring the moderate forces together with the progressive forces of the Democratic caucus, I think, rather well, and got a bipartisan bill through. We'll have to see on the next part of it, and it's going to be trimmed back. It'll probably be $1.75 trillion or so, but he's trying to catch up with what we need to do with Medicare and education and dealing with child care. And he's concerned about people who are at the lower rungs.
To paraphrase a phrase, a comment from many years ago, 1.2 trillion here, 1.75 trillion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. These are frightening figures for people, even if they're entirely legitimate assessments of how many roads, bridges, and so on. So is there, if you like, a communications and PR issue there in terms of getting across those kinds of figures without frightening people about how it's going to hit their pocket?
Well, there's a point here that I think it's a nuance that we need to mention here, is that I think the senators, all of them, are trying to make sure that this is paid for, that there are no budgetary gimmicks in terms of looking down the road and all of a sudden saying we've just blown up the deficits. They're trying to pay for them so that there's a return on investment here, which is a little bit different than the sort of squishy figures that were used during the tax cut during the Trump administration. So if we can get this paid for and still catch up with people's needs, there are a lot of childcare, for example, the education, pre-K. It would, I think, shock a lot of people in the UK to understand what we don't support in terms of government help with our education system.
Well, we can debate whether or not it's paid for. We think these numbers are pretty squishy, but there is no doubt that if you pass a $1.75 trillion, you're suggesting it may be, and you're dumping that into an economy that is already inflated. I've never heard of solving inflation by pouring more money into the economy. That makes it worse. more dollars chasing fewer goods, and you're going to see inflation take off even more. And that's frightening the American people.
Well, it could be, but we do want to put people back to work, and we've seen a lot of people leave their employment because of COVID and other reasons. But we want to get people back to work, get the economy humming, and that will generate revenue as well. So I don't see it as a big LBJ type of program, and
It's the biggest price tag ever.
well,
Produced, seeking to do more than any bill ever.
well, we need to improve the lives of a lot of people, and we need to catch up with education, childcare. We need to work with people at the lower rungs of the economic ladder, and we need to deal with climate change. We just made some promises in Glasgow. We're a large polluter, and we need to catch up with the rest of the world and lead the rest of the world there.
While that COP was going on, back in the USA, of course, there were important gubernatorial elections and indeed state legislative elections in Virginia and New Jersey. Just two states because, audience, you probably already know, but the states decide for themselves when they have elections, and just Virginia and New Jersey did it this year. But in both of those, one could say that the Democrats took a little step backwards, at least, losing one of those governorships, and retaining the other, but with a reduced majority, and losing state legislative seats. Are these blips? Are they a population using off years just to punch the administration on the nose quickly, bring it to tension, bring to their needs, or are they real precursors of what's coming?
I'll let Tim handle this one.
I'll
I'll jump
start
in,
it.
of course, but his party just had a victory in Virginia, so.
I live in Virginia, so I followed that race very closely. And it is, I think, a precursor. It is an omen of what you can expect in the midterms. Virginia has been trending more and more blue, more and more Democratic. And so for the Republicans to win the governorship, lieutenant governorship, attorney general, legislative pickups, it truly is a bad signal for the midterms, for the Trump administration. I think there will be Charlie Cook, who's one of the big prognosticators in the U.S. on political elections. He's predicting a pickup of Republicans of 40 seats next year in the House races. I think that's probably, so it'll be Republicans taking over the House. Now, let me just hasten to say, Larry and I were both in the House when Bill Clinton was elected president. He had a big defeat in his midterms, came back to win a solid reelection. So there's an eternity between now and the next presidential election, and I'm certainly not trying to predict the outcome of that. But I do think the midterms look very, very solid for the Republicans.
My comment on the Virginia race would be that we must observe that the victor there, Youngkin, did not run as a pro-Trump and didn't bring the former president into Virginia. So there was a certain formula there where he was an early supporter of former President Trump, but then he didn't want to be seen with Trump and he wanted to run his own race. So there could be a winning formula there, but that's not necessarily good news for Trump advocates. As well, but you can't deny the victory. It looked like the Democrats had really captured Virginia and turned it blue, but it does show how close these elections are. After all, the Senate is 50-50, and there's a slight majority for the Democrats in the House. So that represents the country. Virginia, which has been on the bubble anyway and gone blue, now it's gone red but just well, it's not slightly because they won the major races, but it's going back and forth. Historically, things do not look good for the Democrats, but I would make the case that you can't beat somebody with nobody. So the Republicans have to have good candidates running against incumbent Democrats. And there's still a year left, which is an eternity in politics. And we could be faced with all kinds of things, more inflation or less inflation. We could have an eruption in any part of the world, in the Middle East. Some of our allies could run into trouble, which might demand or cause our military intervention. It's a long time to predict in politics, I think, is tough. But history is not on our side here in terms of a midterm election, that's for sure.
You are nicely preempting some of the other questions. So those of you who've asked those questions, I do apologize for repeating them, but several of them have been covered very well. Somebody's asking what are your predictions for the 22 midterms. You've already said quite a lot about that, but let's maybe we'll come back to that as well. But something that you said about Youngkin, who won for the Republicans, and indeed, and you're quite right, the Republicans won deep into that state because they won the whole slate of statewide seats for the first time in a couple of decades, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
And also they won in an interesting way. I didn't go through all the candidates, but there was one was an African American woman,
Correct.
not the prototypical Republican candidate, and there were other elements of diversity
Yes, there was.
in that slate, which suggests something. And the other
I
thing
was very glad to see that. I think that's very good for the Republican Party. We had a Hispanic win the Attorney General seat, immigrants from Cuba, and then of course the Lieutenant Governor, who is, I think she's Jamaican, so very, very diverse ticket. And Youngkin was a gifted political candidate for someone who had never run for public office before. He was upbeat, cheerful, hopeful, and I think, Larry, you're right. This could be the formula that Republicans need to look at, where they don't invite former President Trump in to campaign and stump for them, and they kind of keep him arm's distance.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what another of our viewers has asked.
And let me make a point there, if I may, Phil, while we're on this, because I think the Democrats, what they were trying to do is tie Youngkin to Trump.
Yes.
And it was an ineffective strategy.
Yes.
And I think as things are developing here, because the ultimate polls are these elections, is that the formula is probably just talking about local issues, get back on local issues, try not to nationalize these things, and really talk to people. I think the Democrats have had a bit of a problem in communicating and talking the language of the voters. And you mentioned Charlie Cook, Tim, earlier, and there was James Carville the other day said that the Democrats are just not talking the right language, and that they should go to woke rehab. And I mean, it was really some hard, syrup there, to take and to digest, so I think there was a lesson there, and if we learn from these things, then I think we can move on. But and don't forget, Terry McAuliffe was a retread in the sense that he had already run before. There's still an anti-establishment sentiment, I think, out there. That, and it did not play well for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. I don't think it played so well for Terry McAuliffe this time.
James Carville, of course, otherwise known as the Raging Cajun, is the guy who came up for Clinton with the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," and it may be coming back, that kind of attitude. But yes, but does Youngkin's success and the Virginia success leave the GOP with a different problem, looking like a divided party, because their strategy X is let's keep Trump out of it. Let's become more diverse, which of course some members of the Republican Party have said before. Romney said it, Karl Rove said it, Bill Brock way back said it. Some of them doing that. A tactic that on the whole the National Republican Party hasn't tried at all. And then other parts of the Republican Party being so loyal to Donald Trump that, yesterday they said that Lynn Cheney is no longer to be recognized as a member of the party.
I saw that. Well, every state and every campaign is going to be different next year. A candidate running in Arkansas can give a big bear hug to Donald Trump and be fine. It will be helpful. And in many parts of the country, that will be the case. And then there are states like Virginia, which are swing states and voted by 10 points for Joe Biden. Well, that's where President Trump's involvement in a campaign may be counterproductive. He may need to stay away. But I think it's going to be a state by state, congressional district by congressional district. And as Larry said, a lot of it's going to depend upon the quality of the candidates that each party can put up. The opportunities there, history's on our side. I think it looks good for Republicans, but they've got to have a good recruiting season. They've got to put good candidates up. They've got to run smart campaigns, and it's yet to be seen how all that will play out. But yeah, we're kind of a divided party, just as the Democrats are pretty divided too.
Well, we are, and I don't think we have the exact equivalent of the Freedom Caucus, which is so ideologically driven that they don't want to do any deals unless they get 100%. I think what Nancy Pelosi has been able to do in the House is talk to the progressives and use the word compromise and say you're not going to get everything. And Bernie Sanders we were talking about the size of that bill, Tim, and he wanted $6 trillion, and then they went down to $3 trillion. Now we're taking it down, and now we're trying to make sure that whatever it is financed and funded. But I think it was also Spanberger who said, and this is sort of a new descriptor for Democrats, is that people are saying, the moderates are saying, I'm a normal Democrat. And so they're trying to differentiate themselves from somebody like AOC, who won in the Bronx, which really is not the same as a moderate would have to portray themselves in a swing district.
Mm. And of course, those kind of pockets of leftism and rightism, if you like, existing geographically in the country and therefore in the party. I do remember years ago one of my Democratic friends referring to part of California as Berkeley. One very specific, one thing specifically interesting to students, one question that's being asked is about student debt. Student debt affects students in this country too, and therefore, Jemima and her colleagues and friends will be interested in this issue very really, in a very real way. So the question goes, it's been quite specific, student debt in the US is currently running at about 1.7 trillion, another one of those trillion numbers. And so how is this problem to be addressed? As President Biden got an answer to it. Are there going to be write-offs? Or is it just one of those endemic issues?
Tim's waiting for my answer because he's interested in how this is going to go. I tell you, this is a very difficult issue because there are so many different levels of debt. There are parents who are in debt because they've signed loans for their children. There are for-profit colleges and universities, and mainly colleges in the United States, that have business models that are just based on the federal flow of money into these programs that really are not preparing people for the workplace. We have people who are living off the money, but we do have programs that if you go into public service, then your debt is forgiven. If you're a teacher and you work for a nonprofit and so forth. So those programs could be dealt with and not have total forgiveness. Of course, some people would like to just have everything forgiven, but this is a debt. Somebody's holding the debt. Not in all cases is it the federal government. it is a huge problem in the United States with the explosion of cost of college. And I think some people are, to drive it down, are just going to have to walk with their feet and not apply to these schools, but they keep applying. The costs keep going up, and it's really a problem in the United States. I must say, I don't have the solution to it, but I think they've got to maybe modify some of these programs so that there's more of an outlet if you go into public service and so forth. There are ways. I have a niece, for example, that's doing exactly that with a large amount of debt. And but I'm not sure just writing a check is.
Larry, you and I agree on this one. It is a huge problem, and I don't have the answers either. We used to, we've got student assistance programs, a number of them, and they would bring the proposals before our committee when I was in the Senate, wanting to raise the monthly allotment and the amount that you could borrow, and they would, talk about the needs. We'd usually raise it. Every time we would raise student assistance, the universities and colleges would raise tuition prices and absorb it and take it. So that the amount of money that you feel, $1.6 trillion, if students started defaulting on those, it would in itself cause a huge economic crisis in the country. And I think Larry's right again. The American people they don't want just to forgive the debt, nor have they really shown a lot of support for free college tuition in the future. So there is no easy solution to it. It is something that both parties need to grapple with, and it is worrisome. And I'm totally with you, Larry, on your analysis.
If I may make one point that I think is endemic and a real problem in the United States, and that is financial illiteracy, is that when you step up and you take these loans, they're a debt and they have to be paid off. And I wish we could get a handle on that so that young people moving forward would also have a sense of how this all fits into their lifestyle and so forth, because it's causing problems with the growth in our country where young people are delaying marriage, delaying purchase of homes and cars and moving on with their lives because they have this huge cloud over them with the debt. And it just breaks my heart in some ways that people enter into these arrangements and don't hold back, take a gap year, or go to a state-sponsored supported university. I just want to mention that. I'll look while we're here to find out if financial illiteracy is also an issue.
Maybe. Just for those of our audience who don't know, there are a wide variety of universities and colleges in the United States at a wide variety of different fee levels. And the elite private ones tend to, if you're talking tuition, student, room and board, the whole kind of kit and caboodle, tend to be around 75 grand a year. But state colleges, state universities are much more reasonably priced than that, supported by the local taxpayer. Still a significant amount of money. And I would also like to point out that I've got skin in the game here. since my two grandchildren are both American citizens. And one of them's just applying for college right now. Yes. Another question that you may not be expecting. I wasn't expecting this, but it's quite a good one. I think quite fun, and it's not really about America. Does America care about Brexit? Does it care about Europe, indeed, and the European Union? Does it care in the least about Britain's exit from the European community?
Scott, Larry, I look forward to hearing your comment on this, but it's not something in everyday conversation you hear Americans talking about a lot. At the time of the vote, there was a lot of press and a lot of media and a lot of attention on it. But Americans are pretty much self-absorbed with the problems they're facing right now. I think our government cares. I think our leaders understand. Congress cares. But the average American, they've got bigger concerns that are closer to home.
Yeah, I think we cared enough about Britain to come here, but and because we feel that this program is really important to create and continue the dialogue between the U.S. And Britain, and understanding where American politics at the time. I agree with Tim. There's not a lot of focus on Brexit right now. I mean, I think if we really paid attention to our trading partnership with Britain, people would start focusing on it. But it had its headlines, and for the people who are anti-establishment and want to get out of sort of big government, they might have thought it was really a good thing for the Brits to put it to the EU and get out from under the regulatory, regime and structure and so forth. But how it's going to play out here, I just don't know. Of course, people saw the relationship between Trump and Boris Johnson, and how that was playing out with two sort of very colorful leaders, and whether there were similarities there. Most people I know don't wake up every day thinking about Brexit.
Yes. Jemima, this is unfair because you weren't expecting me, but I'm wondering, your student colleagues and friends, is this an issue that concerns them, or do they see this as something that's happened and just the world will carry on?
In terms of Brexit, as an average British citizen, it's something that does come up in conversation with us. But it all depends on your perception of whether Brexit was good or bad. If something happens, you do have the odd person that goes, well, because of Brexit, isn't it? Like, it's something that, like you were saying with the president, you either give credit to it or you blame them. And with what's going on in terms of the apparent fuel crisis, the supposed fuel crisis, and the shortage of lorry drivers, it's something that comes up in debate, but it also depends on your kind of political awareness and your cultural awareness of certain things. As somebody who studies international relations and people that I associate with, it's something that's going to come up in conversation. You can have a quite big debate about it, but for a lot of us, it's something that you kind of touch upon here and there. You kind of give blame to it, or you give credit to it where it's due. So it's kind of a conversation starter. Conversation starter for some of us, yeah.
I would say among political analysts and people in my political world, what we focused on was sort of the rural-urban split that happened during the vote, and trying to determine if there was a similarity in the United States with the geographical shift in power from red to blue, and also to the degree that there was misinformation in the campaign, and that we see that all the time now in the campaigns and what's going on, especially during the 4 years of Trump, with misinformation and sort of the marketing of fear, if you will.
Yeah. Another problem that we share transatlantically, the pandemic that continues. Yes, it does. Certainly, the opinion polls immediately, the exit polls immediately after the presidential election suggested that Trump's management of the pandemic damaged his potential for re-election. But the pandemic rolls on and hasn't been defeated. I'm not quite sure what word one should use. So, how do you think that the perception of the current administration's management of the pandemic is going to be assessed?
Well,
You should start.
okay. You want me to go ahead?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's one thing I didn't mention in my opening remarks, but I think the president is using science. He's putting the right people in front of the issue, with Dr. Fauci, who was put on the back burner and out of sight by the Trump administration. This is all about using our knowledge-based science and medicine and the healthcare officials to deal with this. He's being very bold about the mandates, because what he wants to do is he wants to get this behind us, and he wants to build a community spirit rather than dividing America. It's being challenged in the courts in terms of the mandates and so forth, but he's at least looking at the federal government where he's the commander in chief and the CEO essentially of the government to put the mandates where we can to try and move the needle and increase the vaccination rates. And I have to say the vaccination rates in the UK are very high, and thank God we've finally opened up travel and so forth so that we could actually be here. But we had some British friends that were joining us in our wilderness trip this summer that couldn't come to the United States, even though their vaccination rates were very high. But we still have a way to go, and it's pretty much balkanized in the United States, with some states doing well, some cities doing well, and others not doing well.
So I just want to say that with all of the criticism of Trump's handling of it, and I don't disagree at all, Phil, that hurt him certainly in his reelection effort, that Trump ought to get credit for Operation Warp Speed and the speedy, almost miraculous development of these vaccines and the use of giving the funds to and the resources to and the support to the pharmaceutical companies, Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, in developing these vaccines, which is just amazing that we've got it. I think in the United States now, the total number of vaccinations is approaching or right at 200 million. So we've come a long ways, and now, thanks to the FDA, they have approved vaccinations for school-aged children, and that's going to add millions more. So I want to be optimistic that we're going to continue to see new cases drop, hospitalizations, and certainly deaths decrease. Something we've got to be vigilant on, and I will commend President Biden on the effective rollout and the stress on the need for vaccination. I've been shocked that we've seen such an anti-vax movement in the United States, and that even vaccines have become politicized and polarized in our country.
Well, that leads us neatly into one of the other questions that our audience have asked, which is, how can polarization be reduced in the US? And if it's got so deep that it even affects evidence-based scientific stuff, it's got very deep indeed. How can that be tackled?
Well, for me, it's much easier to analyze how we got to where we are and all the things that have contributed to this polarization, but we are where we are. I was talking to some of the students today that in the United States, in the Congress, in the House and Senate, there are members of both political parties who love America, who are patriots, who want to do what's best for the country. But somehow we've got to the point that politically they don't think they can work together and make their constituents happy. I once had a friend in the Senate, Johnny Isakson of Georgia, when he's now retired, but he said, in regard to the national debt, he said, we Republicans and we Democrats need to hold hands and step off the cliff together. Well, I think that's where we are on this unbelievable polarization. There needs to be Republicans and Democrats together who step up and say, for the good of the country, we've got to get beyond this. We've got to work together. We like to talk about the bipartisan nature of the infrastructure bill, but there weren't very many on either side that really crossed over. It is bipartisan in name only. There's so little of what is real bipartisanship. So that's my message, and I give that message every time I have the chance on the Hill, is that we've got to return to civility and a willingness to work together and to give a little bit in order to do something good for the American people.
And on the infrastructure bill, I mean, you had 13 Republicans vote for it, and now the former president, Donald Trump, wants to take them out, and he calls them rhinos. So the iron grip that he has on the Republican Party is so evident because he's threatening to use the $100 million he has or whatever power he has to take people out and to purge the party and to cleanse it so that they're all sort of acolytes and followers of his cult. And there's a big discussion going on and debate in the United States is whether we talk about these issues in an equivalency way, or whether this is something that the Republican Party should somehow get a grip on what Trump is doing. Is that why is there so much silence going on? Tim, you've been an outspoken critic and very brave on this issue, but institutionally, he's got a full head of steam, and he's got an open road here to run on, and money in the bank, it's not a direct equivalency. I'm not going to whitewash the Democrats and so forth, because we could do more in terms of the partisanship. I just wish that the last 4 years that we didn't have so many, 30,000 plus lies and sort of a conspiracy theory type of, environment that we had to live under. So I hope we can get back on track. And I think that's why Joe Biden was elected, to restore some normalcy and morality to the government and to restore faith. But I think that our fragile democracy has had some severe shots taken at it, and I hope we can survive. Americans, and I think you pointed this out, Professor, is that they favor a divided government, and we may get a divided government. I just hope we can talk to one another in a civil tone.
Hear, hear.
I believe that we've got some more questions coming through from our student audience that I haven't seen yet. Are they coming up? Right, here we go. If Russia invades the Ukraine or China invaded Taiwan, what would be the reaction from the Biden administration? And would the Republicans act differently?
Well, I'm always very reluctant to criticize or speculate on foreign policy. I think that's one place that the people of the United States need to be united, and we need to stand behind our president. The president has said that we are committed to Taiwan, and he's warned China, and I'm glad for that. It's beyond my ability to speculate. I was on the Armed Services Committee. I was very involved in foreign policy, but I don't want to try to speculate on what the United States might do if China should invade Taiwan. I think China has been very provocative in what they've been doing in the South China Sea, the signals they're sending toward Taiwan, the threats that have gone out. So I stand with the president. Back off China. Don't take lightly what the United States has said. And I'm gonna really leave the Russia-Ukraine question right over to Larry.
I must say that I think the Biden administration is going to be more traditional in the sense of diplomacy. We've just seen his dialogue virtually with the leadership in China, which I think is an engagement policy that we're going to use, and we'll put the right team together and try and build back the hollowed out State Department with diplomats who know and can work with our allies and our adversaries and work these things out and de-escalate any tensions. Tim is right that China has been provocative in terms of what they've done with Taiwan. I don't believe, it's my reading of the Taiwan Relations Act, that it does not necessarily mean that an attack on Taiwan is an attack on the United States, but it's darn close to it. On the Ukraine, thank God we're back in NATO, and that we're part of that multilateral agreement, and the UN is also recognized for de-escalating issues, and that may be the first step. And we may have to use our allies if something like that happened, not necessarily in a military sense, but to try and deal with any aggression. So we have to keep talking to Putin. We have to keep talking to China. These are hot spots in the world, and I'm glad we have somebody who's so well schooled in foreign affairs at the helm.
Thank you very much. Can we have another question? Thank you. With more GOP stalwarts stepping back when terms expire, gosh, I'm going to have to move this. Sorry. With more GOP stalwarts stepping back when terms expire, feeling the party no longer one in which their type of republicanism has voice or home, do you foresee potential schism should Trump gain the 24 ticket? That's quite a complex one. But we've covered quite a lot.
Yeah, I guess that goes to me. The truth is that there have been very few GOP stalwarts step forward. Relatively speaking, there's only been a handful been willing to step up and say they want a different direction for the party and they want different leadership for the party. If Trump runs, there's going to be some Republicans peel off, just as there were. I think the reason that you see so few elected Republican leaders stepping up is because they're afraid. They are absolutely fearful that they will have a primary opponent inspired by former President Trump, and that would mean their defeat. Some are retiring early, though the numbers are still small. That's happening. So do I think the Republican Party is going to schism? I think it's more likely there's going to be some people of conscience who leave the party, step back from it until the direction of the party becomes more clear. Right now, it is very definitely Donald Trump's party. There's no platform. The whole party is around him and his personality, and that's caused a lot of people to be really anxious about where the party goes in the future, including yours truly.
I'd make the observation that Liz Cheney has had some events in New Hampshire, which is an early primary state. So that's one person, but you've got to have a movement either way, from the party. Tip O'Neill used to say that all politics is local, but Donald Trump, all politics is personal. And
Well, he still has enormous support among Republicans. All the polls show that if he runs, he'll win the nomination. Not Liz Cheney nor Adam Kinzinger or any other one who's spoken out against Trump has the kind of following that can really threaten him winning the nomination. And so we'll see what he decides to do.
I think we can get at least one more question in before our time is due. And we have another one. Okay. If you had Joe Biden's ear now, what would you advise him? There's a nice one.
there you go. Yeah.
That's definitely over to you.
Wow. I would say keep talking to the American people straight. Get out to the red states. He came to Idaho recently. Get on the road. Get out of Washington, D.C. Travel the country and talk to people and talk to them straight about what you're doing to get a handle on inflation right now and how and to really in anticipation of the Build Back Better, just have a way of communicating what this means to America and why it's so important to the administration to pass this historic bill and listen to James Carville and talk the language of the people. He does a good job of that. I like Scranton Joe, Scranton, Pennsylvania Joe, but that's not all. There are a lot of rural areas like Idaho that have to hear his vision for the country, and just keep working and working hard.
Would you give him
No,
advice?
I'm just listening right here on what the advice that was given.
Well, I know in a sense the other side of that coin is how would the Republican advise Donald Trump, but I'm sure you wouldn't want to advise Donald Trump apart from to get out of the way.
I would advise him, don't run for reelection, step back, quit tweeting, we've got a lot of future Republican leaders out there, Youngkin among them, many others. Allow a new generation of leadership to take hold in the Republican Party.
And do you have a sense of who might emerge from that new generation?
Well, of course, I'm very high on Governor Youngkin in Virginia,
Okay.
but DeSantis in Florida is probably the front runner right now. If Trump did not run, Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina and ambassador to the UN, very popular, big following. She's got a great future in the party. I'll stop there.
Yeah, a nice field. Is there time for one more question, do we think? Have we got another one? Oh, we've done Donald Trump. Yeah, we've done that one.
We just did it. He probably didn't like my advice.
Moving on, here we go. That's right, that's the next one. Is it too soon to draw conclusions on the success of the Biden presidency?
Yes, it is. It's much too soon. It's 9 months into this, and he's done his best to tackle the real economic issue of the time, and that is COVID, and getting the country back on track, getting people vaccinated, deal with the solutions to this public health pandemic. I think he's recognized that it's been a priority for him. He stuck his neck out. He's working with the business community. He's working with government agencies. It's science-based. It's not false solutions like bleach or Clorox or ivermectin or anything. It's science-based. And so it's a good start. The bipartisan bill is infrastructure bill is through. He's starting to roam around the country, but it's much too early. It's much too early. Give him another year, but the midterm elections are going to be how Americans grade the administration. It always is. Nothing's changed in politics as far as that goes, and he knows it. He's been around Washington a long time.
I agree it's too soon, and I've already said that, but midterms are going to go Republicans' way. If Republicans control the House and Senate, President Biden's going to have a very difficult time getting anything through the last 2 years. And the American people at some point reach a verdict, like they did with Jimmy Carter, who was a one-term president, where they decide we need competency and we aren't having competency. This isn't what we wanted, and they make a decision that becomes irrevocable. We're not there yet, but the signs are not really great for the Biden presidency.
But it's much too early for him to announce whether he's going to run again or not. I think a lot of people assume that he may have gotten involved in this to turn the country around, take us away from Trump, put the country back on track. And I don't know what he's going to decide. That's his decision. But if he were to decide not to run and work with people, and I think you made the observation, Tim, that the Clinton administration, after losing the House and the Senate, actually his popularity soared, and he was able to work with Congress at that time. Americans wanted divided government. He absorbed that and started working that in that way. And that may happen after the midterm elections.
The Clinton re-election campaign was brilliant.
Yeah,
It was brilliant.
It was a superb campaign.
So we tell everybody, stay tuned. It's going to be interesting.
Stay tuned. The reason we're having this program is to discuss this and think of all of the equations and how it could work out. It's been a real pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you very
Larry.
much.
Thank you very much, Jemima. that lovely introduction, and also for responding so nicely when I dumped a question, which is entirely unfair. And I'd like to thank everybody who has tuned in to us, and everybody who made this possible. We love being here in De Montfort. It will continue. Thank you all.